We are big fans of the crock pot, the slow cooker, and we also love Chinese food. So, this sweet and sour pork recipe that I've been toting around for who knows how long seemed like a good idea. I'm going to cut to the chase though and tell you that the flavor on this one was not as expected. So I did end up adding some things to it at the end. But we're going to start out by prepping our carrots. The recipe calls for 5 medium carrots. This is close enough for my purposes. We're going to also chop an onion. In my case, our family likes it a little lighter, so we'll just go with a half an onion. And the recipe wants you to slice these onions then into half-inch pieces. Mine are maybe more bite size in many cases. Do you, though? Doesn't really make any difference. Into this Ziploc bag, we're going to add in about 3 tablespoons of flour, all purpose flour. And then I'm going to salt it to what I think is going to be appropriate for my family. The recipe calls for a half a teaspoon. I'll use a couple shakes. And then a quarter teaspoon of ground black pepper. I usually go heavy on the black pepper. The recipe calls for 1.5 pounds of lean pork stew meat, which I just could not find, or pork shoulder. I didn't want to buy a whole pork shoulder. So what I did is just buy pork chops and then trim them up, try to trim the fat as good as I could. And this probably ended up being about 1.25 pounds, roughly. The pork chops I bought were bone in, so kind of hard to tell. Throw them in the flour in the Ziploc bag, a few at a time, and just kind of get them evenly coated with the flour. Using the skillet of your choice, put a little bit of oil in the pan. I'm using olive here, and then you're going to cook your meat in batches, and you'll want to do probably about 4 or 5 minutes per batch. You're cooking the meat until it's browned. So you want it a nice sear on it. You're not cooking it until it's done. Just get that nice color on it. This is my first batch of meat done, and that's going to go directly into the slow cooker, and then we'll repeat for the second batch. Add a little more oil if you need to. With the second round of meat, you're going to go ahead and add your onions and cook those also along with the meat. They'll be nice and translucent and softened by the time the meat's ready. And then all of that goes right into your slow cooker, along with those carrots. While that's finishing cooking over there, we're going to go ahead and get the sauce ready. So you want 1 small can of diced tomatoes, so 14.5 ounce. I had a big one. I'm just going to split it. And then I'm adding a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar, a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Back over on the stove, my pork is done, so I'm going to go ahead and move that into the crock pot also. Back at the sauce, the recipe calls for tapioca. I am just going to use a tablespoon of cornstarch instead. The recipe wanted you to use 2 tablespoons of the quick cooking tapioca. Either's fine. In a pinch, you can also use flour. And here's where I deviate. I did add the tablespoon of Worcestershire. Go ahead and add a couple tablespoons of chili sauce and then some garlic and ginger. Once that sauce is stirred up, you're ready to add that to your slow cooker and give everything a stir before putting the lid on. And you're going to cook this over high heat for 3.5 to 4 hours or over your low heat setting for 7 to 9 hours. We chose the latter, and this is what it looks like when it's done. I know some of you are screaming at the screen, where's the pineapple chunks and the green peppers and all the good veggies? You're definitely going to have to add them to this recipe because it didn't really include any of that. So as you can see, we added a green pepper. I didn't have pineapple chunks, but that is normally something that we like. Now, we did serve this over jasmine rice, and the recipe called for pre-cooked, but use whatever you've got. And guys, just be sure to follow the recipe that I'm going to add to the description, not the recipe that will be in a picture on the website. It's wintertime, so a winter style soup sounded great. And I've never had one with Italian sausage as the meat base for the recipe, so we thought we'd give this one a try. We're starting out with preparing our vegetables. We've got our onion and garlic. We'll get that prepped and get the garlic minced. Over on the stovetop, we've already started our pan with a couple tablespoons of olive oil. We'll add our onions and garlic, and we're going to saute that for roughly 3 minutes. I know I did longer than that. You can see I kind of overdid it on the heating. Our sausage we're using is just a mild sausage. You could easily use a hot sausage. This, I started slicing it, which is what the recipe called for. That was too much work. So we're just going to use ground sausage and the few that I had sliced. And we'll kind of chunk that up into smaller pieces in the pan as it browns. The browning should take about 5 minutes. You'll want to make sure it's got some nice color to it. And then I'm going to turn my heat down before it burns up. And I'm adding, instead of 8 cups of chicken stock, I'm going to do 8 cups of my homemade bone broth. This is going to take a while for this to come up to temperature, for that to unfreeze. So go ahead and add oregano, basil, and parsley. And that will heat up nicely once you put the cover on, especially if your bone broth is frozen. Back on the countertop here, we're going to go ahead and get that parsley chopped up. I had to run out to the garden to get that, and then we'll add that chopped parsley in. Oh, and I pulled out of my freezer from my winter food prep, my summer food prep. I've got some zucchini, so we'll just add that along with that frozen bone broth. Put the cover on, put the temperature up, and then things went bad. This is a nice thick bottom stock pot. The simmering on low temperature went great for an hour, but then you're to add in 2 cups of uncooked white rice and simmer for another 30 minutes. When I came back to the pot, of course, the rice was all stuck on the bottom. So I took out the non-scorched part of the soup, and this is what it looked like going into our dishes. Guys, this was not a soup that either Rod or I really cared for. I am eating it for lunches every day, and it's perfectly fine. It's just, I guess we're not into sausage type soups. Maybe if we had used a hotter sausage rather than a sweeter sausage, that might have done the trick. Not quite sure, but it's just one that both both of us said that we just would prefer not to make again. So sorry, Darren, about your recipe. I'm sure there's lots of people that love it, just not on our preferred list. To redeem myself, I'm going to try this Taste of Home soup. I've tried very few recipes from Taste of Home that weren't delicious, so this is our next one we're going to try. We're going to go ahead and prep our vegetables. We're going to chop 2 carrots and 2 ribs of celery. It calls for finely chopping. You know me, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to that, so we're just going to chop these into bite-sized pieces. And then it calls for a medium onion. I think I've got a half an onion left. We'll go ahead and chop that also. Since I burned up the last soup in my heavy stock pot, I'm going to use my Dutch oven here instead. We'll start out with a half a cup of butter, which we're going to melt into the Dutch oven. And over medium-high heat, we're going to add all those chopped veggies and cook them until they're tender. This took, I think I let it go about 5 minutes, and the onions were translucent and the carrots and the celery were starting to soften. Here we're going to add the thickening agent. We're using flour in this case, about a half a cup. Then we're going to stir this up, let this cook for about a minute. It'll start to brown up slightly, which is perfectly fine. And once that's nice and bubbly, then we're going to add 4 cups of chicken broth. and I'm out of my homemade bone broth, so I'm gonna just use some Walmart brand low sodium broth, chicken broth, not chicken. This will cook up about a couple minutes. It asks you to add it in gradually. I did pretty good here. And then half and half. And on mine, I didn't have 2.5 cups of half and half, so I did supplement with some milk. We'll stir that in gradually, give it a stir. Then we've got 2 cups, this may be slightly more than that, of cooked wild rice. We'll stir that into the pot, and then we've got some spices that we'll add in. Oh gosh, don't forget the turkey. This is the last of the Thanksgiving turkey that I've just chopped into little smaller pieces. It calls for 2 cups of cubed. I'm pretty certain that was more than that, but we're just using up what we've got. Now we're going to add in a teaspoon of dried parsley and then salt and pepper to taste. At this point, guys, this was delicious. You can see I didn't add in the salt because we're using store-bought chicken broth. This was perfect right now. But I thought, wouldn't this be really good with mushrooms? And I didn't have mushrooms, but I did have some mushroom powder from Trader Joe's, and I added a little Worcestershire. And as you can see here, I'm still trying to use up my ground flaxseed. So I'm going to add about 4 tablespoons of that too. Probably added in about a tablespoon of Worcestershire and maybe a teaspoon of the mushroom powder. This was perfection with these additions. Guys, it was really good even without it, but we're just a family that really likes mushrooms. So this was delicious, delicious, delicious. I will make this every season, multiple times. We had some leftover biscuits from last week. We pulled those out of the freezer, and this was dinner. We have enough to make 2 full dinners and possibly a couple lunches with it, but I won't really know that till after we pull the second half out of the freezer. This was delicious, guys. Make this. The recipes are in the description. Leave us a comment and let us know your favorite wintertime recipes. Thanks for being here.